They say everything's bigger in Texas, including the egos of HOA presidents who think they can evict you from land your family's owned since 1897. When Veronica Hastings rolled up to my ranch gate in her pink Cadillac at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning with an eviction notice and a smirk that could curdle milk, I knew she'd just made the biggest mistake of her privileged life. See, what she didn't know was that her precious Willowbrook Estates, with its fancy gates and tennis courts, was actually built on my property, and I had the original land grant from President McKinley himself to prove it. By the time I was done with her, she'd be begging to pay triple rent just to keep her community from becoming a cattle pasture again. My name is Mason Caldwell, and I've been running the Double C Ranch outside Dallas for the past 15 years, ever since my father passed and left me 800 acres of prime Texas real estate. The land's been in our family for 5 generations, starting when my great-great-grandfather James Caldwell received it as payment for helping build the first railroad through North Texas. We've survived droughts, depressions, and more recently the encroachment of suburban sprawl that turned our neighboring ranches into cookie-cutter subdivisions with names like Pleasant Valley and Sunset Ridge. Willowbrook Estates popped up 3 years ago on what used to be the Henderson Ranch about a quarter-mile from my eastern property line. 247 houses, all painted in various shades of beige and gray with matching mailboxes and those little yard signs warning about security systems nobody actually has. The developer promised country living with urban amenities, which apparently meant a gate that breaks every other week and a community pool that's closed more often than it's open. I'd had minimal interaction with the HOA until Veronica Hastings got herself elected president 6 months ago. Veronica was everything wrong with suburban Texas, wrapped up in a 5'2" package of bleached blonde hair and designer activewear. She moved here from California after her third divorce left her with enough money to buy the biggest house in Willowbrook and enough free time to make everyone else's life miserable. Within weeks of taking office, she'd instituted new rules about everything from the acceptable height of grass to the approved colors for garden hoses. The morning she showed up at my gate, I was in the middle of feeding my horses when I heard the obnoxious honking of a car horn. I looked up to see a pink Cadillac Escalade parked sideways across my driveway, blocking the entrance completely. Veronica stepped out wearing white pants that had no business, being within a mile of a working ranch and sunglasses that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments. "Mason Caldwell," she announced, holding up a manila folder like it was a weapon. "I'm here to serve you with official notice from the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. You have 30 days to cease all agricultural operations and vacate this property." I set down my feed bucket and walked over to the gate, taking my time because I could see it was annoying her. "Morning to you too, Veronica. You lost, or just practicing your parking skills?" Her face flushed red under her spray tan. "This is no joke, Mr. Caldwell. The HOA has determined that your ranch operations constitute a nuisance to our community. The smell, the noise, the unsightly appearance of your barns and equipment, it's affecting our property values and quality of life. Is that so?" I leaned against the gatepost studying her. "And what exactly gives your HOA authority over my property?" She thrust the folder through the gate bars. "It's all in here. Environmental regulations, zoning ordinances, health codes. Your operation is in violation of at least 17 different statutes. If you don't comply voluntarily, we'll get a court order." I took the folder and flipped through it, seeing a bunch of photocopied pages from various websites and what looked like HOA meeting minutes. "This is interesting, Veronica, but there's one small problem. My ranch has been here since 1897. Your subdivision was built 3 years ago. Ever hear of something called grandfather rights?" "That's what you all say," she sneered. "But times change, Mr. Caldwell. This isn't the Wild West anymore. Civilized communities have standards, and your operation doesn't meet them. Civilized communities also respect property rights," I said, handing the folder back. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got work to do." She grabbed the folder and jabbed a finger at me. "This isn't over. The HOA has resources you can't imagine. Legal teams, connections in the county government. We will shut you down one way or another." "Looking forward to it," I said, tipping my hat. "Now move your car before I call the sheriff about someone blocking a private drive." She stormed back to her Escalade and peeled out in a cloud of dust. I watched her go, then pulled out my phone and called my lawyer Jim Thurman, who'd been handling ranch business for our family since the 1980s. "Jim, it's Mason. I just had an interesting visit from the new HOA president next door. She seems to think she can evict me from my own land." Jim chuckled. "Let me guess, Veronica Hastings. She's been making noise about your ranch at the county commissioner meetings. Woman's got more money than sense. She mentioned something about 17 violations and getting a court order. Mason, I wouldn't worry too much. Your property rights are rock solid, but just to be safe, why don't you come by the office tomorrow and we'll go over everything. Might be time to dig up some of those old documents your daddy kept in the safe. The next morning, I drove into town to Jim's office in the old bank building on Main Street. He had his paralegal pull out 3 boxes of documents dating back to the original land grant. As we sorted through deeds, surveys, and contracts, Jim suddenly stopped and held up a folded map from 1994. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered, spreading it out on his desk. Mason, do you remember when the county wanted to extend Willow Creek Road through your property? Vaguely. Dad fought them on it for years. Look at this survey map. See this section here? He pointed to a triangular piece of land on my eastern boundary. The county surveyor made an error. They recorded this as county property for the road extension, but your daddy caught it and filed a correction. Only the correction was never properly processed. What are you saying, Jim? He leaned back in his chair, a grin spreading across his face. I'm saying that according to the county's own records, that triangle of land where they built the entrance to Willowbrook Estates, including their gatehouse, their monument sign, and about 30 houses, is still technically part of the Double C Ranch. I stared at the map, feeling a mix of shock and amusement. You're telling me they built part of their subdivision on my land? Not just built on it. They've been trespassing for 3 years. And if this survey is right, which I believe it is, their community pool and tennis courts are sitting right on top of your grandfather's old cattle pen. Jim, this is huge. What do we do with this information? First, we get a new survey done to confirm everything. Then we decide how you want to play it. You could demand they remove the structures, you could seek back rent, or you could use it as leverage to get them off your back about the ranch operations. Get the survey done, I said. And in the meantime, I want to document everything Veronica and her HOA do. Something tells me she's not going to stop with one threatening visit. I was right. Over the next 2 weeks, Veronica escalated her campaign against my ranch. She filed complaints with the health department, the Environmental Protection Agency, and even animal control. Each time an inspector showed up, found nothing wrong, and left shaking their head at the waste of taxpayer resources. She organized protests at my gate with a dozen suburbanites, holding signs about property values and quality of life. She started a social media campaign called Shut Down the Stink that featured photos of my ranch taken with a telephoto lens and creative captions about health hazards. What Veronica didn't know was that I was documenting everything. I installed security cameras along my property line that captured her sneaking onto my land at night to take pictures. I recorded every interaction, including one where she offered my ranch hand, Carlos, $5,000 cash to report fake health violations. Carlos, who'd worked for our family for 20 years, told her exactly where she could stick her money, but in much more colorful language. The survey results came back exactly as Jim had predicted. 32 houses, the gatehouse, the community amenities, and the main entrance road to Willowbrook Estates were all built on Double C Ranch property. The error dated back to 1994, when a county clerk had misfiled the correction my father had submitted. Legally, I owned almost 68 acres of what Willowbrook Estates thought was theirs. I sat on this information for another week, while Veronica continued her harassment campaign. She managed to convince the HOA board to file a lawsuit against me for maintaining a public nuisance and intentional infliction of emotional distress on the homeowners. The lawsuit demanded $5 million in damages and an immediate cessation of all ranch operations. That's when I decided it was time to play my cards. I had Jim draft a letter to every homeowner in Willowbrook Estates, informing them that they were trespassing on private property and owed back rent for the past 3 years. The rent amount we calculated based on current market rates came to $4,800 per month per household. For 32 households, over 3 years, that totaled over $5.5 million. The letter also stated that as the legal property owner, I would be installing a gate at the actual property line and charging a monthly access fee of $800 per vehicle for anyone who wanted to use the road. The community pool and tennis courts would be converted back to agricultural use unless the HOA wanted to lease them for $20,000 per month. I had the letters delivered by certified mail on a Friday afternoon, then sat back and waited for the explosion. It didn't take long. My phone started ringing within an hour, as panicked homeowners realized they might not actually own their houses. But the best call came from Veronica herself, screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "This is extortion. This is fraud. You can't do this." "Actually, Veronica, I can and I am. You wanted to play legal games, so let's play. Your houses are on my land. You owe me rent. It's pretty simple. We'll sue you into bankruptcy. Get in line. You already sued me, remember? By the way, how's that public nuisance lawsuit going? Because from where I'm sitting, the only nuisance is the illegal subdivision on my property." She hung up on me, but I knew this was far from over. That weekend, I had a crew come out and install a heavy-duty gate at the actual property line, complete with a card reader for the access system I was implementing. I also put up large signs stating, "Private property, Double C Ranch, access fee required." Monday morning was chaos. Homeowners couldn't get to work without going through my gate, which I'd programmed to require a special access code that could only be obtained by signing a rental agreement and paying the back rent owed. Several people tried to ram the gate only to discover I'd installed concrete bollards. Others parked on the highway and tried to walk in, but it was over a mile to the first houses in 100-degree heat. By noon, I had reporters from 3 local news stations at my ranch wanting to know about the HOA hostage situation, as one creative producer called it. I gave them copies of all the documents showing the survey error and the county's failure to process the correction. I also shared the security footage of Veronica trespassing and trying to bribe my employees. "This isn't about money," I told the cameras. "This is about property rights and the abuse of power by an HOA that thinks it can bully longtime residents off their land. They wanted to use legal technicalities against me, so I'm using facts and law against them." The story went viral within hours. "Texas rancher locks out entire subdivision" became the top trending topic on social media. Legal experts weighed in on the survey error, and most agreed that I had a valid claim to the land. The county commissioners called an emergency meeting to discuss the crisis, while the developer who built Willowbrook Estates frantically searched for insurance policies that might cover this scenario, but Veronica wasn't giving up without a fight. Tuesday evening, she showed up at my gate again, this time with what looked like a private security team, 3 black SUVs full of men in tactical gear who positioned themselves around my entrance like they were planning an assault. "Open this gate immediately," she demanded through a bullhorn. "This is false imprisonment and kidnapping. You're holding 200 families hostage." I strolled out to meet her, keeping my hands visible because those security guys looked a little trigger happy. "Nobody's being held hostage, Veronica. They're free to leave anytime they want. They just can't use my private road without permission. We have easement rights. Show me the easement." "I'll wait." She turned to a nervous-looking man in a suit, presumably her lawyer. He cleared his throat and said, "We're researching the easement documentation." "Let me save you some time," I said. "There is no easement because there was never a legal transfer of this land. You built on property you didn't own, and now you want to claim rights you don't have." One of the security guards stepped forward, his hand moving toward his holstered weapon. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back and open this gate." "On whose authority?" I asked. "Mine," he said, puffing out his chest. I laughed. "Son, you're on my property without permission, which makes you a trespasser. I've got every right to defend my land. And before you get any ideas about that weapon, you should know that I've got 6 cameras recording this interaction, and my attorney is on speed dial." Jim's voice came through the speaker I'd installed at the gate. "This is James Thurman, attorney for the Double C Ranch. Any attempt to force entry onto this property will be met with criminal charges." I'd also remind the security personnel present that impersonating law enforcement is a felony in Texas. The security guys suddenly looked a lot less confident. One of them muttered something into his radio, and they all started backing toward their vehicles. Veronica screamed at them to stay, but they were already leaving. Professional security teams know better than to get involved in property disputes that could land them in prison. "This isn't over," Veronica shrieked as her hired muscle abandoned her. "I'll go to the governor if I have to. I'll call in every favor, every connection. You'll regret this, Mason Caldwell." "Ma'am, the only thing I regret is not checking the property lines sooner. Could have been collecting rent for 3 years." She stormed off, and I went back to my evening chores thinking that would be the end of it for the day. But Veronica had one more card to play, and it was a doozy. Around 8 p.m., I got a call from Jim, telling me to turn on the local news immediately. There was Veronica standing in front of the Willowbrook Estates sign with tears streaming down her face. "My daughter has type 1 diabetes," she told the reporter. She needs insulin to survive, and this cruel man won't let us get to the pharmacy. He's literally putting my child's life at risk for money." The reporter, a young woman who looked like she'd graduated journalism school about 5 minutes ago, ate it up. "Mr. Caldwell has essentially imprisoned an entire community, including children and elderly residents. The Homeowners Association is calling for immediate intervention from state authorities." I grabbed my phone and called Jim. "Did you see this theatrical performance?" "Already on it," Jim said. "I've got the pharmacy records showing that Veronica picked up her daughter's insulin prescription yesterday. I've also got footage from your gate showing that you offered to escort any medical emergencies through personally. She turned you down. She's disparity, Jim. What's our next move?" "We file for an emergency injunction preventing her from making any more false statements. And Mason, I think it's time we played our ace in the hole." "What ace?" "Remember those complaints Veronica filed with all the government agencies? Well, my paralegal did some digging. Turns out, Miss Hastings has been using her HOA position for some very interesting activities. She's been collecting special assessments from homeowners, supposedly for legal fees, but the money's been going into her personal account. We're talking about over $300,000 in the last 6 months. She's embezzling from her own HOA? That's what it looks like. And here's the kicker, she's been using that money to fund her campaign for county commissioner. She figured if she could get elected, she could change the zoning laws and force you out that way." I whistled low. "Jim, this is huge. We need to get this to the authorities. Already sent the evidence to the district attorney and the Texas Rangers. They're very interested in having a conversation with Miss Hastings about misappropriation of funds and campaign finance violations." Wednesday morning brought a circus to my gate. News vans, protesters, HOA residents, and curious onlookers all gathered in a chaotic mass. Someone had set up a portable toilet, and a food truck was doing booming business selling breakfast tacos to the crowd. I felt like I was under siege, but at least it was a profitable siege for somebody. Around 9 a.m., a convoy of official vehicles arrived. Texas Rangers, county sheriff, and what looked like investigators from the Attorney General's office. They bypassed the crowd and came straight to my gate, where I was waiting with Jim. "Mr. Caldwell," the lead ranger said, touching his hat. "I'm Captain Reynolds. We need access to Willowbrook Estates to execute a search warrant. I understand you control the entrance." "Happy to help, Captain," I said, entering the code to open the gate. "Just out of curiosity, what's the warrant for?" "Financial crimes related to the Homeowners Association," he said carefully. "We'll need to speak with a Miss Veronica Hastings." The convoy rolled through, followed by several news vans that slipped in before I could close the gate. I figured Veronica was about to have a very bad day, and I wasn't wrong. An hour later, I watched on the news as she was led out of her house in handcuffs, screaming about conspiracies and her rights being violated. The reporter breathlessly explained that the HOA president had been arrested on charges of embezzlement, wire fraud, and campaign finance violations. But the real bombshell came when investigators searched her house. Hidden in her home office, they found detailed plans for what she called Operation Clean Sweep, a systematic campaign to force out longtime residents and ranchers to make way for more upscale development. My ranch was just the first target. She had files on every property owner within 5 miles, including fabricated evidence of violations and strategies for legal harassment. One document particularly caught my attention. It was a contract between Veronica and a development company owned by her ex-husband. If she could force me to sell my ranch, he would buy it for $20 million and cut her in for 30%. The same ex-husband who she claimed had left her with nothing in their divorce. The whole thing had been a scam from the beginning. By Thursday morning, the Willowbrook Estates HOA was in complete meltdown. Half the board members had resigned, and homeowners were demanding answers about where their money had gone. The developer was facing lawsuits from people who'd bought houses on land he didn't actually own. The county commissioners were pointing fingers at each other over the survey error that had started it all. I met with a delegation of homeowners at my gate that afternoon. They looked exhausted and defeated, nothing like the angry mob Veronica had whipped up just days before. "Mr. Caldwell," said an older gentleman who introduced himself as Bob Patterson, "we owe you an apology. We let Veronica convince us that you were the enemy, when really she was using us for her own gain. Is there any way we can work this out?" I studied the group, seeing genuine remorse on their faces. These weren't bad people, just folks who'd been manipulated by someone they trusted. "I'm willing to discuss a solution," I said, "but it's going to require some changes." We spent the next 3 hours negotiating. I agreed to sell the land under their houses to them directly for a fair price that reflected what they'd already paid. The developer plus a reasonable amount for my trouble. The access road would remain private, but I'd grant an easement for residential use only. The community amenities would be leased back to the HOA for a modest fee that would go toward maintaining the ranch. There's one more condition, I said as we wrapped up. The HOA agrees in writing that it has no authority over the Double C Ranch and will never attempt to interfere with our operations again. Any complaints about smell, noise, or anything else related to normal agricultural activities will be dismissed automatically. They agreed immediately. Bob Patterson even shook his head and said, "I can't believe we tried to shut down a ranch that's been here for over a century. My grandpa would have tanned my hide for disrespecting property rights like that." Friday afternoon, I was back to my normal routine feeding horses and checking fence lines when Jim called with an update. Veronica had been denied bail after prosecutors argued she was a flight risk. The investigation had expanded to include her connections with several county officials who'd been taking bribes to support her development schemes. The Texas Rangers were calling it one of the biggest corruption cases in county history. "Oh, and Mason," Jim added. "Remember that security company Veronica hired? Turns out they were unlicensed and several of them had outstanding warrants. They're all in custody now too. Sounds like Veronica's house of cards came crashing down hard. That's an understatement. The FBI is now involved because some of the embezzled money crossed state lines. She's looking at federal charges on top of everything else." I hung up and walked out to my front porch, where I could see the Willowbrook Estates entrance in the distance. The gates were open now, and residents were coming and going freely under the terms of our agreement. The whole ordeal had been exhausting, but it had also taught valuable lessons about standing up to bullies who abuse power. My phone rang again, and I was surprised to see it was Bob Patterson. "Mason, sorry to bother you, but we've got a situation at the front gate. You might want to come see this." I drove over in my truck, wondering what fresh hell was about to unfold. But when I arrived, I found something unexpected. The entire HOA board was there, along with about 50 residents. They'd set up tables with food and drinks, and there was a big banner that read, "Thank you, Mason Caldwell, defender of property rights." "We wanted to do something to show our appreciation," Bob explained. "You could have crushed us with that land dispute, but instead you worked with us to find a fair solution. And you exposed Veronica's corruption when you could have just taken the money and run." "I don't know what to say," I admitted, feeling genuinely touched. "Say you'll stay for barbecue," someone called out. "We've got brisket from Franklin's." I stayed until well after dark talking with my new neighbors and finding out they weren't the entitled suburbanites I'd assumed them to be. Many were Texas natives, who understood the importance of ranching to our heritage. Others were newcomers who'd moved here specifically because they wanted to live near working agricultural land. All of them had been fooled by Veronica's manipulation, but they were determined to do better going forward. As I was leaving, Bob pulled me aside. "Mason, there's something else. We found more documents in Veronica's house during the investigation. She had a whole file on your family going back generations. Birth certificates, death certificates, financial records. It was creepy how much information she'd gathered. Why would she do that? We think she was looking for any leverage she could find. But here's the interesting part. She had a DNA test in there that showed she's actually related to the Henderson family, the ones who owned the ranch before it became Willowbrook Estates." I stared at him in shock. "She's related to the Hendersons?" "Distant cousin, apparently. Her maiden name was Henderson, but she'd been going by her ex-husband's names for so long, nobody made the connection. We think she believed she had some claim to the land and was trying to get your ranch as part of some twisted family revenge plot." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Old man Henderson had tried to buy our ranch for decades before he died, and his kids sold out to developers. He'd always claimed part of our land should have been his based on some dispute from the 1920s. Veronica must have inherited his obsession along with his DNA. I drove home shaking my head at the bizarre turn of events. You think you know why someone's coming after you, and then you find out there's a whole other layer of crazy underneath. At least with Veronica behind bars and her schemes exposed, the Double C Ranch could go back to what it did best, raising cattle and preserving a piece of Texas history. But as I pulled up to my house, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The lights were on inside, and my front door was standing wide open. I never left my door open. Never. Someone was in my house. I reached for my phone to call the sheriff, then stopped. There was a note taped to my truck windshield that I hadn't noticed before. Written in neat handwriting were the words, We need to talk about what really happened to the Henderson Ranch. Come inside alone or everyone will know the truth about 1923. My hand trembled as I read the note. 1923. The year my great-grandfather had won the Henderson property in what family legends said was a poker game, but there had always been whispers that something darker had happened. Something that explained why the Hendersons had spent generations trying to get the land back. I looked at my house, then at my phone, then back at the note. Every instinct told me to call for backup, but if someone knew the truth about 1923, if there was evidence that could challenge my ownership of the ranch, then I needed to know what I was dealing with. I tucked my phone in my pocket, took a deep breath, and walked toward my open front door, having no idea that the real battle for the Double C Ranch was just beginning. I stepped through my front door, with my hand hovering near the pistol. I kept in my truck's glove box, wishing I'd thought to grab it. The house was quiet except for the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, a sound that suddenly seemed ominous instead of comforting. The living room looked undisturbed, but I could smell perfume, something expensive and floral that definitely didn't belong in a bachelor rancher's house. "In here, mister." Caldwell. A woman's voice called from my father's old study. "I promise I'm not armed, and I'm not here to hurt you. We really do need to talk." I moved cautiously down the hall and found a woman in her 70s, sitting in my leather chair holding a manila envelope thick with documents. She had silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and wore a black dress that looked like it cost more than my truck. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, but what struck me most was how much she looked like Veronica Hastings minus 40 years and the crazy, "Who are you and what are you doing in my house?" "My name is Eleanor Henderson Mills," she said calmly. "I'm Veronica's aunt, though. I'm ashamed to claim her after this week's events. I'm also the last living person who knows what really happened between our families in 1923. How did you get in here?" She held up an old brass key. "Your great-grandfather gave this to my mother along with a promise that one day the truth would come out. I think that day has finally arrived, don't you?" I lowered myself into the chair across from her, still tense but curious. Despite myself, "If you're here to claim the ranch based on some 100-year-old grievance, you're wasting your time. The courts have upheld our ownership repeatedly. I'm not here to take anything from you, Mr. Caldwell. I'm here to give you something. The truth. And to make sure my niece's poison doesn't spread any further than it already has." She opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph, so old it was more sepia than black and white. Two men stood in front of what I recognized as my barn, though it looked newer in the picture. One was clearly my great-grandfather, James Caldwell. The other must have been Theodore Henderson, based on the family resemblance. "They were partners," Eleanor said, watching my reaction. "Not rivals, not enemies. Partners. They built this ranch together starting in 1897. Everything you've been told about a poker game, about bad blood between the families, it's all lies designed to hide something much simpler and much more shameful." "What are you talking about?" She pulled out more documents. "Your great-grandfather and mine were best friends. They pooled their money to buy this land and worked it together for 26 years. They were like brothers. Their children played together. Their wives quilted together. It was a beautiful partnership until Prohibition came along." I leaned forward despite myself. "Prohibition? What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything," Eleanor said sadly. "You see, both men saw an opportunity to make money bootlegging. The ranch was perfectly positioned on smuggling routes from Mexico, but they disagreed on how to do it. Theodore wanted to be careful to limit their involvement. James wanted to expand to take bigger risks for bigger profits." She showed me a letter dated March 15, 1923. This is the last letter Theodore wrote to his wife before he died. In it, he talks about meeting James to settle their disagreement once and for all. He was found dead the next morning, shot through the heart. James claimed it was self-defense, said Theodore had tried to kill him over the bootlegging dispute. "You're saying my great-grandfather murdered yours?" "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I'm saying that's what everyone believed, including my family. The sheriff ruled it self-defense, but the damage was done. Theodore's widow, my grandmother, took her children and left Texas. She spent the rest of her life telling anyone who would listen that James Caldwell was a murderer who stole their land. But you don't believe that?" She pulled out one more document, this one much newer looking. 6 months ago, I was going through my mother's things after she passed. I found this hidden in a book. It's a letter from James Caldwell to my grandmother, written in 1948, 25 years after Theodore's death. I took the letter with shaking hands and read, Dear Mrs. Henderson, I know you will never forgive me, and I don't ask for your forgiveness. But as I near the end of my own life, I need someone to know the truth. Theodore didn't try to kill me that night. He killed himself. The shame of what we'd become, what we were doing with the bootlegging, it was too much for him. He couldn't live with it, but he also couldn't bear for his family to know, so we made it look like I'd shot him in self-defense. I've carried this secret for 25 years, and it has eaten me alive. The ranch is yours by rights. Theodore's half should have gone to you and your children. I've put aside money every year waiting for the day one of you would come back to claim it. The account information is below. I pray God will forgive us both. James Caldwell. I set the letter down feeling like the world had shifted under my feet. This is why the Hendersons have been trying to get the ranch back all these years. Yes, Eleanor said, but they never knew about this letter. My grandmother died, believing James was a murderer. Her children grew up on that poison. It twisted them. My brother spent his whole life plotting to get the ranch back. He passed that obsession to his daughter, who married badly and became even more twisted. Veronica grew up, hearing she'd been cheated out of her birthright. Why are you telling me this now? Because the cycle needs to end. Veronica's going to prison, but she has children. Do you want them growing up with the same poison? The same obsession? Or do we finally tell the truth and let both families heal? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the land that had caused so much pain. What happened to the money my great-grandfather put aside? It's still there, Eleanor said. The account has been growing for 75 years. It's worth about $40 million now. I whistled low. And you want to claim it? No. I want to use it to do something both our great-grandfathers would have wanted. I want to create a trust that helps young ranchers get started. Theodore and James built something beautiful here before greed and shame destroyed it. Let's honor their memory by helping others build their own dreams. I turned back to her, seeing not Veronica's aunt, but a woman trying to right old wrongs. What about your family's claim to the ranch? What claim? My grandmother left Texas and never looked back. We built new lives elsewhere. The only claim we had was based on a lie about murder. Now that I know the truth, that claim dies with me. Veronica won't see it that way. Even from prison, she'll keep fighting. Eleanor's face hardened. Veronica is about to have bigger problems. You see, I've been investigating her for years. This isn't her first attempt to steal property using HOA positions. She has victims in California, Arizona, and New Mexico. I've been in touch with prosecutors in all 3 states. By the time they're done with her, she won't see freedom until she's 90, if ever. You'd do that to your own niece? She's a predator who destroys lives for money and twisted revenge. Family or not, she needs to be stopped. Eleanor stood gathering her documents. I'll leave these copies with you. The originals are going to the Texas Historical Commission. It's time the real story was told. Wait, I said, as she headed for the door. How do I know this isn't another trick? Another attempt to get the ranch? She smiled sadly. Because Mr. Caldwell, I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer stage 4. I have maybe 2 months left. I'm not spending them on revenge or property disputes. I'm spending them trying to undo a century of damage caused by lies and misunderstandings. I walked her to the door, feeling overwhelmed by everything I'd learned. As she stepped onto the porch, she turned back. Your great-grandfather was a good man who made a terrible choice. But he spent the rest of his life trying to make it right. That's the real Caldwell legacy. Not the land, not the cattle, but the willingness to face hard truths and do better. After she left, I sat on my porch until well past midnight, thinking about everything she'd told me. The next morning I called Jim and told him the whole story. He was silent for a long time after I finished. Well, that explains a lot, he finally said. What do you want to do about it? I want to meet with the Henderson descendants, the ones who aren't in jail. Let's see if we can finally bury this feud and do something positive with that money. It took a month to arrange everything. Eleanor, despite her illness, took the lead in contacting family members and explaining the truth. Some didn't believe it. Others were angry that the lie had shaped their lives. But eventually we got 23 Henderson descendants together at the ranch for what we called a reconciliation gathering. I'll never forget standing in front of that group holding the letter my great-grandfather had written. Our families have been at war for 100 years over a lie, I said. Both our great-grandfathers were flawed men who let greed and shame destroy a beautiful friendship. But we don't have to continue their mistakes. We established the Caldwell Henderson Trust that day, with the $40 million as seed money. its mission to help young farmers and ranchers get started in an industry increasingly dominated by big corporations. Eleanor insisted on being there for the signing, though she was so weak she could barely hold the pen. "Theodore and James would be proud," she whispered as she signed. "This is what they would have wanted." She died 3 weeks later, but not before seeing the first recipient of trust funds, a young couple from Mexico who reminded everyone of what Theodore and James must have been like in 1897. Full of dreams and determination, ready to build something from nothing. Veronica's trial became a sensation. As Eleanor had predicted, prosecutors from multiple states piled on charges. She was eventually convicted on 47 counts of fraud, embezzlement, extortion, and racketeering. The judge sentenced her to 95 years, making it clear she would never prey on anyone again. During the trial, more of her schemes came to light. She'd been systematically targeting historic ranches and farms across the Southwest, using HOA positions to force sales to developers. The FBI found connections to organized crime, money laundering, and even a murder-for-hire plot against a rancher in New Mexico who'd refused to sell. She wasn't just a corrupt HOA president, she was a career criminal who'd found a unique niche. The Willowbrook Estates HOA was dissolved by court order and reformed under new bylaws that specifically prohibited any interference with neighboring agricultural operations. Bob Patterson was elected president, and his first act was to institute Ranch Appreciation Day, where residents could visit the Double C to learn about cattle operations and Texas history. 6 months after that crazy week when Veronica tried to evict me, I was giving a tour to a group of Willowbrook kids. They were fascinated by everything from the horses to the hay baling equipment. One little girl, about 8 years old, raised her hand. "Mr. Mason, why did that mean lady try to steal your ranch?" I thought about how to answer, then knelt down to her level. Sometimes people want things that aren't theirs. They think having more stuff will make them happy. But the truth is, happiness comes from building something honest, from respecting what others have built, and from being part of a community that looks out for each other. Like how we all look out for each other in Willowbrook now? Exactly like that. As the kids headed back to their bus, Bob stayed behind. "You know, Mason, this whole mess might have been the best thing that ever happened to our community. We learned who we really are and what really matters. Sometimes it takes a crisis to bring out the best in people," I agreed. "Or the worst. I'm just glad we chose the best." That evening I was back on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The ranch was peaceful again. Cattle grazed in the distance. A hawk circled overhead. The limestone gate to Willowbrook Estates was open with residents coming and going freely under the easement agreement we'd worked out. My phone rang. "Jim Thurman. Mason, you're not going to believe this, but I just got a call from the state. They want to give you a commendation for exposing the corruption in the county government." Apparently, Veronica's arrest led to 14 other officials being charged. "You're a hero." "I'm not a hero, Jim. I'm just a rancher who wouldn't be pushed off his land." "Well, hero or not, you've changed things around here. HOAs across Texas are rewriting their bylaws. Property rights groups are using your case as an example. Hell, the legislature is considering a bill to limit HOA authority over agricultural operations. They're calling it the Caldwell Act." After I hung up, I thought about everything that had happened. About Veronica in her pink Cadillac demanding I vacate my own land. About the gates and the protests and the media circus. About Eleanor Henderson revealing century-old secrets. About 2 great-grandfathers whose friendship was destroyed by greed and shame. But mostly I thought about the future. The young ranchers who would get their start, thanks to the trust. The Willowbrook kids who would grow up understanding where their food came from. The healing between 2 families that had been at war for generations. Veronica had tried to evict me from my ranch. Instead, she'd evicted herself from society and given birth to something positive from the ashes of her schemes. The Double C Ranch would continue for another generation and another after that. The land would stay in agriculture, not because of legal tricks or intimidation, but because a community had come together to say some things are worth preserving. As darkness fell, I headed inside to start dinner. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Cattle to feed, fences to mend, maybe even a new crisis to face. But tonight I was content knowing that sometimes standing your ground doesn't just save your own land. Sometimes it saves an entire community's soul. The HOA tried to evict me from my ranch. Instead, I collected triple rent, exposed massive corruption, and helped heal a 100-year-old wound between families. Not bad for a country boy who just wanted to raise cattle in peace. And the best part, Veronica Hastings would have 95 years behind bars to think about what happens when you mistake a Texas rancher's politeness for weakness. The Double C Ranch had survived another threat, and with the lessons learned and bonds forged during that crazy week, I knew it would survive whatever came next. Because that's what ranchers do. We endure, we adapt, and we never ever give up our land without one hell of a fight. 3 years later, I was standing in that same spot on my porch when a certified letter arrived that made me laugh out loud. It was from the Federal Bureau of Prisons informing me that Veronica Hastings had filed yet another lawsuit against me from her cell, claiming emotional distress and demanding $50 million in damages. This was her 7th attempt, and like the others, it would be dismissed within days. The ranch gate stayed open these days. No locks, no fees, no barriers between neighbors who'd learned to respect each other. Sometimes the best revenge against someone who tries to steal your land isn't keeping them out. It's showing them what they could have been part of if they'd only asked nicely. And Veronica? Well, she still had 92 years left to figure that out.